Right, we're back again just to recap what we did yesterday, and that was to glue this tabletop up with stained glue after biscuit jointing it and reshooting these edges to get them nice and true. Now this table is beginning to reveal a few things, and if I turn it over you'll see that I've sanded this as far as I'm going to sand it anyway to get the joints back down something like level. What it does tell me is that they've stained it and they've French polished it. They've stained it when it's all been assembled as a full table because you can see this is the table frame underneath it. However, what it also reveals is that the stain that they've used is probably either ethanol or cellulose, because when they've put it on it's crept underneath the actual frame of the legs, and you can feel a little bit of a step where the stain, the volume of the stain has evaporated off and left the solids behind, or the colours behind. So that helps me a little bit. The underside of the table is always going to be darker than the top, because generally speaking you'd put a dark stain under the underside of any tabletop. This doesn't have to be the same kind of stain, or same colour stain rather, but it more than likely will be the same kind. What they've also done is stained it once and then they've brushed it back, because I can see brush marks through the French polish, but then they've also splattered the surface with the same stain and then let it set before they put the French polish over the top. Now when this joint gets cleaned back so that it's flush with that board and there's no step, there will be marks in this tabletop that disappear here and re-emerge there because I'm cleaning some of the wood away. So what you have to bear in mind, to keep the integrity of the table, you've got to then re-establish those marks as though they were there from when the table was made new. So it's not just a case of taking off the old finish, sanding the surface flush and then staining and French polishing. You've got to put the integrity back into the table, including the splatter marks and everything else. Now what I've done with this, and I've never done this before, but with modern cameras on your phone, if you take a picture of your tabletop, that will give you a good eye to finished product idea of what you've got to put in as a finished item next. I mean, I'm doing this without the leaves. I could go and fetch them, but I'm doing it as a bit of a test piece for myself and for you. So I'm going to go and try and replace this colour from my camera back onto this tabletop just by colour referencing it. It's a bit of a risk, but let's see if I can do it. So the next stage is just whip these off and then start sanding. Now initially I'm going to sand by hand because I just want to see, as I go through the French polish, what the finish is like. You can learn a lot by what the last person that made it did, just by sanding. This is going to get lost, this finish, and I'm not going to be sanding all of this off with a block and paper. Why use old methods when you can use a belt sander and get that off quickly? The customer doesn't want to pay you for 4 hours sanding by hand when you can do it for 20 minutes with a machine. So I'm not that old-fashioned that I have to keep to the old methods, but here we go. Right, straight away I can see here that it's a surface stain. So they haven't used a water-based stain, as in a warm stain with, let's say, Van Dyke brown or Crystadine crystals in it. They've used a rapid evaporating stain because it's not gone that far into the surface of the wood. So I know that I was right with my first thoughts. When I come back to this and you see it again, all this will be sanded flush, and then I'm going to have to then remark all of the old lines after I've stripped the old finish off. It's quite a lot to do, or it looks like there is, but in actual fact this is the biggest job. I'll see you in a bit. Hi, I'm back again now. That's all been sanded down. Didn't have to actually use any mechanical sanding. It was all done with a simple block and sandpaper. Now I did it with a 60 grit which seems very, very coarse, but after the 60 grit I'll be using 100 grit, and used 100 grit at that. But before I go on to the 100 grit, there's some marks, black lines and scratches that have been put in by the maker of the table originally, and what I've done is followed them on through with pencil lines so that I can repeat them, because there's no good sanding all of the, let's call it age related marking in this top, sanding it all away and then refinishing the whole tabletop, that having marks in it, this having marks in it, and that being as smooth as a baby's backside. There's absolutely no point. So you've got to re-continue these in. Now, just as a tip, people say, oh, you hit it with chains and this, that and the other. You don't have to. All you need is a screwdriver like that, and you don't use the corner. You don't do that. All you do is you just simply bruise it. If you start digging in with the back corner, you're creating a V, and you don't want a V. When do you ever see a V in a tabletop? You don't. So it's just a bruise, because then what's happening is with this, the bruise will pick up the stain when we restain this top, and it will also pick up the varnish and the French polish and the wax, and that then will leave a black, just a gentle black line, and this is all you do. So all this rubbish about beating it with chains and dropping old metal irons on it and all the rest of it, how beaten up do you want it, for goodness sake? So this is all that you need to do. I've done down that end, but what you can also do, and I'll show you this in another video, you can actually use round head nails, drop the nails on there and then just tap the surface with another block of wood, so it just pushes the half round, half moons of the nails into the head. But again, you don't smack it one, there's no need to. That's all done. So now what I'm going to do is sand this, and it doesn't matter if the pencil marks don't come out, because all that I'll have done is push them down into the bottom of the let's say the channel that I've made with the screwdriver. Don't worry about it if they're still there, but you want a smoother finish because any sanding marks want to be removed. So you go all the way in, obviously with the grain, and then when you go to the end there, see where I've blended that from there to there, that was because of the step, because we've narrowed the pieces of wood. That one gets shorter in length than that one. So you just do that. You don't go that way, just like this, for finishing anyway. If you go that way, you'll create a score in the wood, and you have a devil of a job to get it out of end grain. So you're saving yourself time and work. I'll come back to that when the camera stops rolling. If the pencil marks disappear, don't worry, doesn't matter, because when you stain it, the stain will fill the grooves that you've made. So you go all the way down like this. And you really want a good light on this. I've got fluorescent lights above me, which aren't great for filming, but they are good for me seeing scratches. But what you'll do is continue on all the way down the wood, down to the end like that, get it prepped, and then the next stage that we're going to do is strip this surface off. When we've stripped that surface off, it will be all over this and that as well, and then we'll go for restaining, French polishing, and the final act of waxing. So I'll catch up with you a bit when I finish this sanding. Hi, right, all of the sanding's done. I'm happy with the finish that we've got on the bare timber, but as I said to you, we've got to remove all of this old French polish and wax that's on the top of it. So it's not going to be an easy thing to do, because the French polish is good. It's a really good finish. So what you need for that is an old 5-litre container. You need some methylated spirits, and then you need wire wool. And for this kind of thing, I'm using I think it's graded as a 0, but you get 0 which is coarse, up to 4 zeros which is really fine. But when I'm stripping French polish I use 0, and I don't pour it all over the surface. I use whatever will stay in there, and I just wipe it over the top, and it disappears very, very quickly into the surface of the polish. Don't get too greedy by trying to do the whole table, and don't worry about coming over the bare wood either. Even though you can see that all disappearing into the surface and evaporating off, don't worry about it. And don't, whatever you do, have a fag on while you're doing this. Not unless you want to light the whole table up. I used to smoke, and I did it once. It was quite impressive, but I lost my eyebrows for about a month. Anyway, now that I'm all healthy, I just sniff methylated spirits. No, I'm not joking. Let the methylated spirits do the job. Just keep wiping it all over. Don't let it run over the edges in great big runs. You're going to have enough go over the edge without trying to do the edges at the same time as the top. And you just keep doing that, wiping it in. And what I tend to do is, once I've done that all over the table, I'll then go and have a cup of coffee, because the first amount that you put on doesn't seem to do anything very quickly. So find yourself something else to do for a few minutes. Come back in 10 minutes, and then when you apply the second coat, the top coat that you've already put on is very soft, and so it works much quicker. So leaving it like that, as you can see, even I'm tending to go back over ground I've already covered here, but leave it like that. Put that back in there. Put a glove on when you're doing it as well. When you've done that and you're happy with it, I'll see you after a break. This surface has now dried, and can you see that, how it's all light coloured and smeary? Well, that's what the methylated spirits does to it. So now that has softened it a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing all over again, but it will start activating and removing the French polish a lot quicker now. You're better off to just go away and leave it, and let the material that you've put on, i.e. the methylated spirits, let it do its stuff. It is quite aggressive, but when you first apply it you think, oh, it's not doing anything, but it will start. When the old French polish starts to come off, it takes the stain with it underneath. The methylated spirits bites through the polish, through the stain, and it will all start coming off in like a gungy mess. But just keep working it, and then it starts to go lighter and lighter, and eventually everything's off. You can feel it start to pull on the wire wool, and that's the surface degrading and turning into like a waxy finish instead of a hard polish. Just keep working it in. And the reason for using wire wool is because from every angle the wool is sharp. So let's say you were to use, I don't know, sandpaper and methylated spirits, you'd scratch the surface again. But what you're doing with this is you're cutting the surface of the French polish away, but not leaving any scratches behind. And so this is why in the restoration industry we use wire wool, and then you have the three or four different grades, so that the nearer you get to the finished article, the finer the wire wool is that you're going to use. But in this scenario, all you use is the coarse. You can't really see it yet, but this is starting to come off now. What happens is the French polish, the methylated spirit starts to disappear very much quicker than when you first applied it on the new, or the French polish finish before it had anything on it. And what that's doing is, because it's disappearing, it's going into the old French polish and removing it. So the patches that are, let's say, turning sludgy faster are the areas where it's just stripping it off the surface faster. Probably going to take about 10 minutes to remove all of this. So if you like, we'll come back and have a look at this in about 10 minutes, and hopefully we should have a finish that's not that colour but a lot lighter than that, so that we've got a preparation and a base so that we can then apply the stain. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Right, we've got the old finish off. All the old French polish has come off it, and as you can see, we've just got a bare timber top. There is remnants of stain left in it, which you would expect because oak is a very open pored wood. The next stage for us is to stain this, and then after the stain, the French polish. Now you'd think that just putting a stain on it would be just fairly straightforward, but I've got a feeling that this has got a sting in its tail for me yet. The reason being, where I've cleaned this joint back flush, we've got a joint there, that's the joint just there that I've done. Now I've taken the surface of the wood off, so all of this old timber here hasn't been re-exposed, but where I've cleaned back and sanded flush these two joints, we've gone through the area of wood that's been open to UV, natural light, and I've got a feeling that when I put the stain on here, we're going to get two different colours. The existing wood that hasn't been sanded to this portion that has. There's ways round it, but let's just see whether I'm right or not. I'm going to use a mix of stain of my own, and I'm going to use a water-based stain at that. Old pot's been around a long time, but this is a mixture of, dare I say it, chrysodine crystals, which is red in colour, but mostly 99% of it is Van Dyke brown crystals mixed up in hot water, allowed to cool, and then they stay soluble in the water. So I'm fairly confident, with having the years of doing this, that it is a Van Dyke brown finish with a brown French polish on the top. If I'm wrong, it's quite easy to get back because it's a water-based stain. When you go into cellulose and ethanols and all the other paraphernalias of stain, they do have a big bite. So when you put them onto the wood, they really do make a quick grab, whereas with Van Dyke brown in water soluble, you've got time, you can draw a bit of it out by having a cloth with water in the cloth to take some of the depth of stain out. The downside of it is that it can raise the grain slightly, but we'll cover that in another video where I'm just doing French polishing, staining and finishing and that kind of thing. So let's give it a go. I'm starting in the middle of the table because it doesn't really matter. If you're going to make a cock-up of the staining, it doesn't matter whether it's on the end or in the middle. Now we're going over this middle bit, and as yet it's behaving itself. Get plenty on all over the timber, leave the edges till last. Sometimes when you've exposed the timber like I have done by finishing the joints, for some reason it grabs the stain more so than the rest of the boards that have been stripped back. But with this one, I have gone to a lot of trouble in fine finishing with fine sandpaper to try and get a really smooth finish on the new exposed wood. It might work, but I have a feeling it won't. So this is also going to be a job where if it doesn't work, I'm going to be showing you how to overcome the stain finish that is slightly different on the new exposed wood. It's not difficult, and even if you left it as two different colours, eventually it would come back to the same colour all over the table, because UV light will go onto the newly exposed sanded surface and eventually bring it back to the same depth of colour as the rest. So you know, there's a lot of drama over stain finishing and that kind of thing, but it doesn't matter what you do, sunlight is going to have its effect, and I haven't found a stain yet, even though plenty claim. I haven't found one yet that does resist natural sunlight. All finishes bleach in the sun. You might find that it goes a bit almost like oil on water in places. Don't worry about it, because it does eventually grab and go into the grain. This probably will look on camera like it's too dark, but like I said to you, when you've got the stain on, you've got time to start doing other things with it. So don't panic. Just make sure that you've got all of the surfaces covered with the stain. Now this to me at the moment looks to me like it's slightly the wrong colour, but I'll come back in a second. But you've got to move fairly quickly, because what I'm going to do at the end of this is draw some of it out with a cloth. Always use cotton cloths if you can, lint free, because then you're not going to be leaving wisps of cotton or fibres that will show up in the French polish afterwards. My eyesight isn't as good as it was when I was a lot younger, and so I have to rely on a few rules to stick by, and that is lint-free cloths. I'll tell you what the best cloths are. Old NHS sheets. I buy them by the bale, and they're fantastic because they've had the life being a sheet, and they've been cleaned, and then they don't release lots of fibres into the wood. Now, I don't know what that's looking like to you. Obviously there's lots of streaks from me brushing it, but as you'll see, that's what Van Dyke Brown will give you. Water based, that'll give you that's the colour that you're going to get on a stripped surface. On new wood it would be slightly different. Now what I'm going to start doing now, because it's reasonably warm in here, even though we are in the beginning of winter, I'm going to start drawing it out. And what this does is it just keeps exposing it so that it evaporates off faster. You'll see the tram lines from the edge of the brush, but don't worry about that. The old tabletop had a little bit of aging to it as well, and again you can do this afterwards. What you want first is a uniform colour. You can use a wider brush than this, but if you're not used to a lot of staining, a wide brush, getting it on fast is the most important thing for you. Without it sounding too big-headed, once you've been doing it a while, it doesn't matter what you put it on with. You can pour it on and run it all over with your hands. It doesn't make any difference. It's how you finish it at the end that matters. So get your experience with a big brush, and then and also practice on old bits of wood as well. Now I'm going to leave that for a few minutes, because I might have got away with this. Won't know for sure until the stain has gone off, but I might just have cracked this one in one go. I'll just do a brief explanation. What will happen is, if you've exposed wood and you only sand it up to the edge of existing wood that hasn't been re-exposed to UV, so you've taken off the surface, what often happens is you get two shades of the same colour. So what you have to do is put one coat of stain on all over, let it almost dry, and then you have to run in again with another layer of stain over the area that's been re-exposed to the UV light where you've sanded. And by doing that, essentially you're giving it a second coat of stain, and you will bring it up to the colour that you want. That sounds like somebody's trying to get hold of me, so I'll catch up with you in a little while when this is dried. Rightio, I think it's time to wipe off the excess. Lint-free cloth, and I work away from myself. And what this is doing, it's taking the excess stain off, but it's also starting to act as a bit of a reservoir as well, so it won't sort of suck it all out of the grain. All you're doing is taking off the top. And the beauty of this, well, any water-based stain, the beauty of it is, see that, is that you can reactivate it, you can put more on, and you can age it at the edges. So when this is cured, which will only take about an hour, something like that, when it's all gone off, you can then rub some away off the surface around the edges with really light 4-0 wire wool. Now it looks like I've had a bit of luck here, because there was a dirty great big lump of sapwood down at that end, which generally speaking on a prestige piece of furniture, which this will have been when it was made new, you don't leave sapwood on the surface. But to be seen underneath doesn't matter, but generally speaking sapwood always shows up as sapwood, but it looks like I've managed to hide it. So you just keep taking it so that there's no lines from it left in, and when you've done that, I'll get a dust brush, a dry one, really coarse, don't worry about any dust that goes in the surface, and then you just do this. And then that finish, you remember right at the start of this video I said I could see brush strokes in the stain. Well, this is replicating those brush strokes, but it's also pulling any excess off the top into those marks. Remember where I said that I was drawing a screwdriver across the top? Well, doing this, it actually exposes those more, so that you've got that aged look back in the surface, even where you've done the repair. Then, like I did earlier on, every now and again you just have to say, right, that's it, and walk away. See you in a bit.